The impossible dream of empire. Every empire believes it will last forever. From Rome to Britain, from the Ottomans to France, each once saw itself as the pinnacle of civilization. And for a time, France truly was. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, the French Empire stretched across 5 continents. It ruled lands from the deserts of North Africa to the jungles of Indochina, from the Caribbean to the Pacific. It wasn't just a political empire, it was a cultural mission. France called it La Mission Civilisatrice, the civilizing mission. But behind this dream of spreading enlightenment was an empire built on exploitation, resistance, and contradiction. By the mid-20th century, one of the most powerful empires in human history collapsed, piece by piece, until little remained but memories, monuments, and ghosts. This is the story of how France lost its global colonies, and what that loss reveals about the nature of empire itself. See the rise of a global power. France's empire didn't emerge overnight. It was built over centuries, through exploration, ambition, and the fierce competition of European powers. By the 17th century, France was already carving out colonies in the Americas and Asia. In North America, it founded New France, vast lands that would one day become Canada and Louisiana. In the Caribbean, sugar plantations made fortunes from enslaved labor. In Africa, the seeds of future domination were quietly planted along coasts and trade routes. After Napoleon's fall in 1815, France faced humiliation and loss. But like all empires, it sought redemption through expansion abroad. The 19th century became the golden age of French imperialism. Driven by industrial power and nationalist pride, France turned outward once again, this time toward Africa and Asia. Between 1830 and 1914, France conquered vast territories. Algeria became a colony after brutal wars of conquest. Tunisia and Morocco followed as protectorates. In Asia, France built the jewel of its empire, French Indochina, including Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Across the Pacific, small islands carried the tricolor flag to the farthest seas. By 1930, France controlled the second-largest empire on Earth, more than 60 million people and 10 million square kilometers. Paris saw itself as the heart of global civilization, a republic of reason and enlightenment. But beneath this ideal was a contradiction waiting to explode. The contradiction of empire. France was a nation born from revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity. Yet its empire was built on hierarchy, inequality, and domination. To the colonized peoples, the promise of French civilization often came at the cost of their own. In Algeria, lands were seized from farmers. In Indochina, rice and rubber were extracted for profit. In West Africa, men were conscripted to build railways or fight in wars that weren't theirs. Still, the French believed they were doing good. Schools, roads, medicine, the tools of modernity were introduced. But beneath it all, resentment grew. Because no matter how civilized one became, one could never be truly equal in the eyes of empire. The French Empire taught its subjects to think, to question, and eventually to demand independence. That was the beginning of the end. World War I, empire at its height and cost. When World War I erupted in 1914, France's colonies became vital. From Senegal to Indochina, colonial soldiers, the tirailleurs, fought and died in Europe's trenches. They defended a homeland many had never seen. The war showed the world both the power and the fragility of empire. Yes, the colonies could supply men and materials, but they also saw, for the first time, that Europeans were not invincible. That even the mightiest powers could bleed, could falter, could die. In the war's aftermath, France emerged victorious but weakened. It clung tighter to its empire, needing it for prestige, for recovery, for pride. But history had already begun to turn. World War II, the shattering of illusion. The true breaking point came not in the colonies, but in France itself. In 1940, Nazi Germany crushed France in 6 weeks. The French government surrendered. The empire split. Some colonies joined Vichy France, others sided with Charles de Gaulle's Free French movement. It was a civil war within an empire. When the war ended in 1945, France tried to rebuild its image as a great power, as a leader in the post-war world. But its colonies saw things differently. The war had changed everything. Colonial soldiers had fought alongside Europeans as equals. They'd heard Roosevelt speak of self-determination. They'd seen Japan drive out Western powers from Asia. They asked, if freedom is good for Europe, why not for us? From that question came revolt. Indochina. The war that broke an empire, Vietnam, once the shining jewel of French Indochina, became the empire's graveyard. In 1946, a war broke out between French forces and Vietnamese nationalists led by Ho Chi Minh. What began as a colonial rebellion turned into a brutal, grinding war of independence. The French underestimated their opponents. They saw peasants, not patriots. But Vietnam had something France could no longer match: belief. For 8 long years, the French fought to hold their empire together. At home, the public grew weary. The cost was too high, the purpose too unclear. Then came Dien Bien Phu, 1954. A remote valley where French paratroopers were surrounded and defeated by the Viet Minh. It was more than a military loss. It was the death of an illusion. France's empire in Asia was finished, but the lesson went unlearned. Algeria. The empire's final wound. If Indochina broke the French Empire abroad, Algeria shattered it from within. Unlike Vietnam, Algeria wasn't just a colony. It was considered part of France itself. 1 million European settlers lived there, alongside 8 million Arabs and Berbers denied equal rights. When the Algerian War began in 1954, the French government called it an operation of order. But it was war, brutal, bloody, and moral in its consequences. French soldiers tortured prisoners. The FLN, Algerian nationalists, used bombings and assassinations. Civilians suffered on both sides. In France, the war tore the country apart, politically, morally, psychologically. The army lost faith in the government. The people lost faith in empire. By 1962, Charles de Gaulle, once a champion of French greatness, recognized reality. Algeria gained independence, and with it, the French Empire collapsed for good. Aftermath: the ghosts of empire. When an empire falls, it doesn't vanish. It lingers, in language, in memory, in wounds that never fully heal. France still speaks to its former colonies through diplomacy, trade, and culture. Paris remains a city where African and Vietnamese voices mix in the streets. The empire's past is never far away. But the emotional legacy is heavy. Many in France still debate: was the empire a source of pride or shame? And for the nations that once lived under its rule, the answer is even more complex. The French Empire is gone, but its shadow stretches across continents, in borders drawn by strangers, in languages spoken by millions, in histories still being rewritten. Lessons from a fallen empire. Why did France lose its global colonies? The reasons are many, but they all circle the same truth. No empire can preach freedom and deny it to others. No power can rule forever through control when the governed demand dignity. And no civilization, no matter how refined, can sustain itself when its ideals contradict its actions. In the end, France lost not only because others rebelled, but because its empire no longer matched its own vision of itself. The contradiction became unbearable. The empire collapsed, not only in war, but in conscience. The echo of history. Empires rise when they believe their story gives meaning to the world. They fall when that story no longer convinces neither the world nor themselves. France's story, of civilization, of glory, of greatness, met its limits in the faces of those it ruled. But in that ending, there is a lesson for every modern power. Power fades, pride blinds. And the moment an empire forgets that others see themselves as human, its decline has already begun. The fall of the French Empire isn't just history, it's a mirror. A reflection for every nation that believes its reach is eternal and its purpose unquestionable. The end that was inevitable. The French Empire once covered the globe. Now, its colonies are sovereign nations with their own languages, cultures, and destinies. Yet the bond, however complicated, remains. History doesn't end, it transforms. The empire fell, but the questions it raised about power, culture, freedom remain alive. The fall of France's global empire was not just the end of conquest, it was the beginning of understanding. Because in every empire's decline, humanity rediscovers its equality. If you found this exploration insightful, give this video a like, share it with a friend, and subscribe to Timeless Questions channel for more deep dives into philosophy, history, and human nature. Because the questions may be ancient, but the wisdom is timeless.